Many people have heard about the torture practices of the Romans, the Greeks, and even the Church. But what a lot of people don't know are about the horrific torture practices of the Native Americans. Famine and diseases were major worries for European settlers in the Americas. However, one thing that was to be feared more than these was the gruesome fate that settlers could suffer if caught as a prisoner by the Native Americans. The old Europeans described the Native Americans as being hostile and barbaric. While this mostly came from a misunderstanding of the cultural clash between the two sides, the torture practices of the Native Americans could make anyone's skin crawl. In this video, we take a look at the different Native American cultural groups in North America and how they treat their prisoners of war while in captivity. Torture has been used in almost all cultures. It could be used to celebrate victories, punish treason, or force information out of the captives. The ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks, and the Catholic Church, to an extent, used torture to protect societal peace. Even though the Native Americans had not made formal contact with these groups, they also had their own unique system of torture already existing. For the Indians, these acts of violence were not inhumane. Most of the time, they were just cultural rules that had to be carried out. In InterTribal Wars, when a warrior is killed, his male relatives are supposed to avenge his death by punishing the killer or a member of the killer's lineage. When the person is captured, the torturers are meant to vent their anger for their dead kin through torture. At the same time, they also take a lot of precautions to ensure that they do not kill the person until it is the appropriate moment, as dictated by Indian spiritual beliefs. This stomach-churning process could go on for days. While this form of torture appears ghastly barbaric to others now, to the natives it wasn't an inhumane act. A Huron, speaking to a French missionary, once described the torture that captives get as caresses for them a day before their death. Where torture was not a cultural practice, it was done in direct retaliation for acts done against their relatives. For instance, the Spanish settlers burnt some recalcitrant Indians at the stake. Records from later years also suggest that the Indians began burning their captives at the stake after the violent contact with the Spanish. Torture was used to dispose of one's war trophies, and in this case, the captives are the trophies. Where captives are not tortured, they could be killed immediately, adopted to replace a dead relative, kept as slaves, or used for a human sacrifice ritual. Penigo, a French settler, gave an account of torture by the Iroquois in Louisiana, where a captive was stripped naked and fastened to a frame of 2 poles, 8 feet in height and 5 feet apart. He was tied with his hands to the top of the poles and legs to the bottom. The village gathered around and they heated different iron objects that were smeared against the captive's skin. He was then scalped, and more activities are carried out on his bare body, involving burning coal and fire until he died. Old Southeastern pattern. Among tribes in the old Southeastern Indians, scalps or heads were treated primarily as sacrificial offerings to the supernatural. In some cases, they were also used for ghost appeasement or as a badge of victory in war. In these Southeastern pattern tribes, there isn't much evidence of torture here, except as a response to the activities of the Spanish settlers. Torture by burning at the stake could not be traced to the Native Americans till about 200 years after the arrival of the Europeans, so it is assumed that this practice did not carry any cultural or religious significance to the natives. When the European settlers arrived, they often used this technique to punish militant Indians, and it is believed the Indians learned this practice as a retaliatory action to the Europeans' own torturous activities. In the lower Mississippi region, the captors would torture their prisoners according to their religious rules. The victim would dance in front of the temple, be touched with an iron brand, and some other torturous activities would be carried out on him in the presence of other members of the tribe. The presence of all these religious items is proof that torture here was done as a spiritual ritual practice to elicit favors from the supernatural. The Iroquois. The Iroquois are another Native American group, and this group also collected scalps as a war trophy. But, more importantly, they prioritized taking captives over scalps. When the captures were not tortured, they were adopted into the family of slain warriors to replace them in their family roles. The Iroquois captured Father Poncet, and he told his story of how he was adopted into a widow's family. When he entered the cabin, the widow and her daughters began to sing the ritual songs of the dead, as a customary practice to bring the dead back to life in the person that was adopted. Just like Father Poncet, Mary Jemison was captured and adopted by two women to replace their dead brother because they believed she was sent by him to them. Adoption among the Iroquois was not always straightforward. Sometimes the tribe could test the captive's hardihood before they are adopted into a family. The adoption ceremony was that the captive would have to run a gauntlet, and only those who could make it to their adopter's house without falling were saved. If the captive falls before reaching the house, they will be slain immediately. In the 18th century, a captive, Kenton, was forced to run a gauntlet, where over 600 Indians, armed with tomahawks, knives, and sticks, were lined up for half a mile, and he was to run between them to a council house. Adoption was also not a sure means of escape. In some cases, adopted people were eventually given over to torture after some time. Frame torture. While some of the torture techniques employed by the Native Americans were learned from the European settlers, some of them were gotten from other sources. There are reports that the Indian used frame torture on their captives of war, and since this is so distinct from the regular torture pattern in the region, it is believed that this practice was imported from other regions. When a captive was to be tortured using this method, the warriors would set up a frame and tie him to it. Then, when they were ready, they would take turns burning him with canes and red-hot nails while the victim was also scalped. Depending on the victim's strength and the practices carried out, this process could continue for a few days. This practice is also associated with other spiritual rituals of human sacrifice. Involvement of women. Another interesting trait of the culture of the Native Americans is the role of women in the handling of captives. In an account of the capture of a Seneca chief by the Cherokee, it is reported that the chief was taken to two women of the tribe to decide what should be done with him. The women decided that the soles of his feet should be burned. They should place grains of corn under his feet, and he should be chased with clubs till he died. In an account of another event in 1776, a white woman was captured and was supposed to be burnt to death. However, Nancy Ward, holding the position of the beloved woman, pronounced her pardon. The position of the beloved woman was not held by just any woman. It was given to women who had made a name for themselves in war in their younger days, but were no longer able to go to war. Another thing that came as a shock to the Europeans was the inclusion of the entire village, including women and children, in the torture process. A 17th century missionary once reported an instance among the Huron where an Iroquois captain was made to run a gauntlet including men, women, and children armed with sticks, knives, and tomahawks. In this report, a woman hacked off the captive's finger, roasted it, and gave it to some children who continued to suck it for a while. The European settlers arrived at the New World with the aim of conquering, and they were met with hostilities from the Native Americans who were already resting there, as both sides battled for supremacy. One of the worst situations to be in was to be captive in a time of war. While some people could be adopted and treated to a good life as a member of the village, some others got tortured for days before they eventually died in excruciating pain. Some of these horrific torture processes were learned from the European settlers themselves. Some others were imported from nearby regions, and some were just passed down through generations as a way of eliciting the support of the supernatural.